The power of the universe had been harnessed, but it sat quietly on a runway in the Pacific, wrapped in steel and secrecy. In the early hours of August 6, 1945, on the island of Tinian, a B-29 superfortress waited beneath a starless sky. Its name Enola Gay was painted plainly on the fuselage, betraying nothing of the burden it carried. 11 men climbed aboard, each trained, each calm, each aware that this mission was unlike any flown before. Beneath their feet rested Little Boy, a weapon born not of gunpowder or fire, but of the atom itself, and no one could be entirely certain what would happen once it was released. The aircraft rolled forward, engines roaring, the runway lights vanishing behind it as the plane lifted into the darkness, and with it rose a question that had haunted scientists and generals alike. What if the world could not survive what came next? The flight path stretched over thousands of miles of ocean, toward a city still asleep. Hiroshima was an industrial and military hub, but at that hour it was simply a place of ordinary life: streetcars, school children, shopkeepers beginning their morning. The men aboard the Enola Gay were not fueled by hatred or bloodlust. They were following orders forged by for years of global war, orders shaped by casualty reports, intelligence briefings, and a belief that this single act might end the killing. If the bomb detonated successfully, the war might finally be over. If it failed, or worse, detonated prematurely, the consequences would be unimaginable. And yet, even as the aircraft pressed onward, few on board fully grasped that this mission was not merely an attack, but a turning point that would divide history itself into a before and an after. This moment in the sky did not appear suddenly, nor was it the product of a single decision. It was the inevitable outcome of a war that had devoured restraint and rewarded escalation. Years earlier, treaties had promised stability, and diplomacy had tried and failed to contain rising empires. One by one, the safeguards of civilization had collapsed under the pressure of ambition, fear, and survival. By 1945, the conflict had become absolute. Cities burned, civilians died by the millions. Entire nations had mobilized not just armies, but science, industry, and ideology. The atomic bomb was not an aberration in this war, it was its logical conclusion, born from a world that had already accepted the unthinkable. As you listen to this story, if you find value in narratives that go beyond dates and battle stories that explore how history actually felt, consider subscribing and liking this video. It helps more people discover these deep, carefully researched documentaries, and it allows stories like this to keep being told. To understand why the United States built such a weapon, one must return to the moment when limits were first shattered. Before laboratories and secret cities, before physicists and generals, there was shock, sudden, violent, and irreversible. A single morning in 1941 would transform isolation into total war, and restraint into retaliation. From that day forward, the question was no longer whether the conflict would escalate, but how far it would go. And once that boundary was crossed, there would be no easy way back. December 7, 1941 arrived without warning. In the warm waters of Pearl Harbor, American sailors prepared for a routine Sunday. Battleships sat at anchor, aircraft lined up neatly on airfields, and the Pacific Fleet rested in what was believed to be a secure harbor. Then out of the sky came Japanese aircraft, fast, coordinated, and deadly. Bombs fell, torpedoes struck, ships burned. Within hours, the United States was dragged into a war it had hoped to avoid, a war that would soon consume the globe. What followed was not just retaliation, but a chain reaction of decisions that would lead, step by step, toward the bomb now flying toward Hiroshima. The year was 1941, and the world was already on fire. Europe was locked in a war of annihilation, Asia convulsed under imperial conquest, and diplomacy had become little more than a delay tactic. Yet for many Americans, the conflict still felt distant, terrible, yes, but far away. That illusion shattered on a quiet Sunday morning in Hawaii, when the sound of aircraft engines cut through the calm over Pearl Harbor. By the time the smoke cleared, more than 2,400 Americans were dead, the Pacific Fleet lay crippled, and a nation had been violently awakened to the reality of modern war. What few grasped in that moment was that this attack did more than draw the United States into the conflict. It ensured that the war would be fought without limits. President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed Congress the next day, his voice steady but resolute. He called December 7th a date which will live in infamy, and asked for a declaration of war. It was granted almost unanimously. America did not simply enter the war. It transformed itself for it. Factories became arsenals. Universities became research hubs. Civilians became participants. This was no longer a distant struggle, it was total war, and survival demanded absolute commitment. In the Pacific, that commitment translated into a campaign of relentless brutality. Island by island, American forces fought their way westward across an ocean dotted with fortified outposts. Battles like Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Peleliu, and Iwo Jima revealed a terrifying pattern. Japanese troops did not surrender. They fought from caves and tunnels, launched suicidal counterattacks, and often chose death over capture. Every victory came at staggering cost. Casualty lists grew longer. Veterans spoke of combat that erased the line between bravery and horror. And as the bloodshed mounted, a grim realization began to take hold among American planners: this war would not end easily. By 1944, the United States possessed overwhelming industrial and naval superiority, yet Japan remained defiant. Even as its cities were bombed and its navy shattered, the Japanese government showed no willingness to capitulate. Firebombing raids over Tokyo killed tens of thousands in a single night, but still the war continued. Each new operation raised the same terrifying question: if this is what it costs to take islands, what would it cost to invade Japan itself? The projected answer was almost beyond comprehension. Across the world, another shadow loomed. Adolf Hitler, emboldened by Japan's audacity, declared war on the United States, expanding the conflict into a truly global catastrophe. Nazi Germany mobilized science alongside armies, seeking technological miracles to turn the Tie-jet aircraft, rockets, and rumored wonder weapons. Intelligence reports filtering into Washington carried whispers of something far worse: nuclear research. If the Third Reich unlocked the atom first, the consequences would be apocalyptic. Whether those fears were accurate mattered less than what they inspired. American leadership now faced a war on two fronts against enemies who embraced sacrifice and surprise. Traditional military logic, attrition, blockades, negotiated peace seemed increasingly inadequate. Every option carried horrific costs. The longer the war dragged on, the more lives would be lost on all sides, civilian and soldier alike. The moral calculus of warfare shifted, not toward mercy, but toward finality. And somewhere in the growing machinery of war, an idea began to harden: if a single blow could end it all, could any price be too high? By the time Allied forces closed in on Japan's inner defenses, the expectation was clear. An invasion operation downfall would unleash unprecedented slaughter. Estimates ranged from hundreds of thousands to millions of casualties. Japanese civilians were being trained to fight with bamboo spears. The nation prepared itself for annihilation rather than surrender. The war had reached a point where victory and survival no longer meant the same thing. Behind locked doors and guarded laboratories, the United States accelerated a project that had begun in fear and secrecy. It was no longer theoretical. It was no longer precautionary. It was becoming a necessity, at least in the minds of those tasked with ending the war. And once that path was chosen, there would be no turning back. The most dangerous weapon of the war began not on a battlefield, but in whispers. Scientists fleeing fascist Europe arrived in the United States carrying more than suitcases, they carried fear. Rumors circulated through academic circles that Nazi Germany was investigating nuclear fission, a process capable of releasing unimaginable energy from the atom itself. To those who understood the science, the implication was terrifying. If Hitler acquired such a weapon first, no city, no army, No ocean would offer protection. That fear was enough, and once it took hold, it could not be ignored. In August 1942, under the highest secrecy, the United States launched the Manhattan Project. It was an undertaking unlike anything before it, a fusion of science, industry, and military authority on a continental scale. Entire cities were built from nothing. Oak Ridge in Tennessee, Hanford in Washington state, places that did not appear on maps and existed only to serve a single purpose. At the center of it all stood Los Alamos, perched in the New Mexico desert, where the world's greatest physicists were asked to solve a problem no one had ever solved before. Could the atom be turned into a weapon before the enemy did? Robert Oppenheimer, brilliant and mercurial, became the project's scientific heart. Around him gathered minds that would redefine modern physics: Enrico Fermi, Edward Teller, Ernest Lawrence. Many were refugees themselves, driven by the belief that their work might prevent a Nazi victory. Yet even among them, unease simmered. This was not just innovation. This was creation on a scale usually reserved for nature or gods. As the months passed, secrecy became absolute. Workers operated in isolation, unaware of the larger picture. Components were designed, refined, discarded, rebuilt. The pressure was relentless. Military deadlines collided with scientific uncertainty. No one could guarantee success. No one could predict the consequences of failure. But the war allowed no pause, and doubt was treated as a luxury. If you're finding this exploration of history compelling, where science, fear, and human choice collide, liking the video and subscribing helps these stories reach more people who crave depth over simplification. It directly supports the creation of narratives that treat history with the gravity it deserves. By 1945, the project reached its terrifying climax. On July 16th, in the Jornada del Muerto desert, scientists gathered before dawn to test the first nuclear device. Codenamed Trinity, the bomb sat atop a steel tower, wired, armed, and waiting. Some feared it might ignite the atmosphere. Others worried it might simply fail. No simulation could provide certainty. There was only theory and faith. When the device detonated, night turned into day. A blinding flash pierced the desert sky, followed by a shockwave that rattled windows miles away. The steel tower vanished, vaporized in an instant. Mushrooming fire climbed into the heavens, silent at first, then roaring. Humanity had crossed a threshold it could never uncross. Watching from a distance, Oppenheimer recalled ancient scripture. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. The weapon worked. Yet success brought no relief, only urgency. Germany had already surrendered. The original justification, beating Hitler to the bomb, had evaporated. Now the question was unavoidable. What was this weapon for, if not to be used? To shelve it would invite future enemies to build their own. To use it would unleash destruction on a scale history had never recorded. As scientists debated morality, the war in the Pacific ground on. Japan still refused to surrender. Firebombing had failed to break its resolve. American casualties continued to climb. The logic that had birthed the Manhattan Project now completed its grim arc. The bomb was no longer a contingency, it was an option. And once presented with an option that promised an end, even at horrific cost, leaders found it impossible to look away. Somewhere over the Pacific, preparations were already underway. By the summer of 1945, the war in Europe was over. Nazi Germany lay defeated, its cities in ruins, its leaders dead or captured. In the Pacific, however, the fighting showed no sign of slowing. Japan's military leadership remained defiant, bound by a doctrine that equated surrender with national extinction. Even as American bombers reduced entire cities to ash, the Japanese government issued no unconditional capitulation. For the United States, the war's end felt close and impossibly distant at the same time. The responsibility now rested on a man who had not begun the war, but would be remembered for how it ended. Harry S. Truman had been president for less than 4 months when he learned of the atomic bomb's existence. Briefed in stark terms, he was told it could destroy an entire city with a single strike. He was also told the alternative Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan. Military estimates projected catastrophic losses: American dead in the hundreds of thousands, Japanese dead in the millions. Civilian resistance was expected, children were being trained to fight. The invasion promised not just victory, but annihilation. Truman faced a choice with no clean outcome. Some advisors urged demonstration detonate the bomb offshore as a warning. Others argued that only real use would shock Japan into surrender. Intelligence reports suggested Japan was seeking mediation, but still refused unconditional surrender. Each day of delay meant more deaths, in prisoner camps, under bombing raids, on distant islands where soldiers still fought and died for ground that no longer mattered strategically. The bomb promised something no other weapon could: finality. On August 6, 1945, the Enola Gay reached its target. At 8:15 a.m., Little Boy was released. 43 seconds later, it detonated 1,900 feet above Hiroshima. The explosion unleashed heat hotter than the surface of the sun. Buildings disintegrated, shadows were burned into stone. Tens of thousands died instantly. Many more would die in the days, weeks, and years that followed. A city ceased to exist in any recognizable form. And yet, even after Hiroshima, Japan did not surrender. 3 days later, a second bomb fell on Nagasaki. Combined with the Soviet Union's declaration of war against Japan, the shock finally broke through. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito addressed the nation, announcing surrender. The war was over, the killing stopped, but the world that emerged was fundamentally altered. The atomic bomb did not end war, it redefined it. Humanity had gained the power to destroy itself, not gradually, but instantly. The weapon born of fear and desperation became a permanent presence, shaping geopolitics, diplomacy, and existential dread for generations. The moral debate that began in 1945 has never ended, only grown more complex. Hiroshima was not the beginning of humanity's darkness, nor was it the end. It was the moment modern war revealed its ultimate truth. When limits are erased, survival itself becomes the justification. History remembers the flash, but it is the path to that moment, the choices, the fears, the escalations that truly matter.